Much, Anna, and uh, thank you for giving me this opportunity to communicate to this audience in India. Um, I decided to give this talk not in a technical, not as a technical talk, but more as a talk on my experiences in doing what I call team science. Um, and I've organized my talk around three topics. Um, First one is how I came into team science, what lessons did I. So I organized my talk around three topics. Um, how I came into team science, what lessons did I learn from running the pub initiative, and then some speculations, some ideas about solving water problems in India. So um, the way I came into this idea of team science is it came from personal experience. After my PhD at Princeton in 1986, I was a postdoc for a couple of years. I couldn't get a job in the US, so I eventually ended up in Australia starting in 1988. And that was for the first time I was on my own, not under the influence of my own advisor, my advisor. And so I had to start a career in research on my own, and that was not easy because I wouldn't claim that I have never done research that I wanted to do. It was all the work that my advisor asked me to do. So, and that was difficult. So, and I tried to, stand on my own feet, do research, but I have to say that, for 5 years, whatever I did, I couldn't take it to the level that I could publish it. So I had no publications between 1988 and 1992. But I had a fantastic head of department who continued to support me and even promoted me without a single publication. So it was only in 1992 that finally I managed to get my own students, PhD students. A few of them joined me, and suddenly, almost overnight, my research productivity went up. And because I had a lot of ideas in my head, for 5 years I couldn't execute them. But the moment I had students, I could get them to do the kind of execute the idea that I had, and almost overnight, in a couple of years, my productivity went up dramatically. And yeah, in 1 year, I had published something like 25 papers. So the moral of the story is that I realized my limitations. That if I could work with other people, I could. I always used to say my students are my extra brains and extra hands. That together we could do a lot more. So that is an example of turning negatives into positives. In fact, I have to say that I have not done any work. I've published something like 250 papers after 1992. I did not contribute even one calculation to those 250 papers that came after that. It was all done by my students or my collaborators and so on. I was just staying in the background, provided ideas, motivated, managed. That was the way I handled myself afterwards. Okay, so that's how my introduction to what I call team science. In 2001, I was on my sabbatical in Delft. And at the time, there was a new president of the International Association of Hydrological Sciences, or IHS, Professor Takeuchi. And he wanted to do some activity at the international level. And he sent out an email looking for ideas. What should we focus on? He was genuinely seeking opinions about what we should be doing. And I was sitting in my office in Delft, and I wrote down an email, a long email about what what could be done. And that idea that I proposed was predictions in ungauged basins. Now, I have to say, even that idea was not really my idea, but it was the idea of Vijay Gupta, a professor from the US who has been visiting me in Australia. And he gave me this idea. And it sounded like a fantastic idea. Something I realized that I was actually already working on that. I did not realize that that is what I was working on. So he gave me this idea, and then when this opportunity came, I wrote this email, and I couldn't believe my eyes. The international community took that idea, and they said they want to do something. That is precisely the idea that they want to run with. And this picture here that you see is the outcome of that initiative. That was a 10-year initiative, and I was the leader from the beginning for about 3 years, and it went on and became a very successful initiative. And so that actually made a mark. You know, it had an important part in my own career development. So I wanted to say something about that initiative myself also. So the first thing I want to say is that, you know, when this email call came, there were a lot of ideas, lots of things were proposed, but the predictions in ungauged basin idea came at the right time. It was the idea that brought everybody together because everybody felt that they can relate to it. So it was that kind of an idea. So that is the reason that it actually became successful. Another thing I want to say about predictions in ungauged basin. So we had a launch meeting in Brasilia in 2002. And it was at that meeting that I was elected to be the chair of that initiative because I was the one who proposed it. I was quite gung-ho about this initiative. It was my idea. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And I was asked to lead it. That was all very nice. And after the launch of the initiative, I went back to Australia and I had to develop a science and implementation plan. And the science plan was not hard to do. So I wrote out the science plan. I had to also come up with an implementation plan. And I was confident that I could lead it because I had all the ideas. It was only as I was writing these science plans that I realized that IHS, International Association of Hydrological Sciences, has no money. They have no money to give. So if I have no money, how can I get anything done? So it was a shock to my system that I'm now leading an initiative with no money, and I'm supposed to lead it in the entire world. How do I do this? And so I decided that I would turn that negative into a positive because I had to. That's the only way I could do it. So what I did is decided to do is instead of me doing everything and me directing everybody to do it, I decided to adopt a plan, science implementation plan that relied on not my work or my group. I came up with an idea that I'm going to make this into a community activity. The entire world comes together, and how do I bring a lot of people around the world with different interests and different approaches? How do I bring them together? So the first idea that I adopted is the idea of plurality. That we are going to allow different people to adopt different ideas, implement them. We want to give them the freedom to do whatever they like. So the idea, because I have no money to give, so I have to rely on their own initiative and excitement. That's the first idea that I came into, turning negative into a positive. And that's how I came up with this logo that I don't know all the answers. I cannot tell anyone what to do. I have to rely on everybody else. And the other problem is that even though predictions in ungauged basin was a clear problem, a lot of people have different ideas, and it's very hard to bring them together. So the only way I could deal with it is to say everybody to everyone, what you're thinking, your approach is also the right approach. Let's all work together. Nobody is right. Nobody is perfectly right. Let's all put together. So that was one way to bring everybody together. That it's not my idea; it's everybody's ideas. And and in order to execute this, I decided to turn the initiative into a grassroots mass movement. Instead of me telling people what to do, I asked them. I asked people to volunteer. I asked people to come together at the grassroots, and we all work together and build up this movement. So this was another idea. This is all happened because I couldn't. I had no money, and I couldn't tell people what to do. I didn't have all the ideas, so I had to rely on everybody's excitement and interest to carry out this mass, almost like a community activity. So in order to come up organize a community activity, uh, different people have different interests, different there are going to be different outcomes. So one of the things that we decided to do in this community building activity is to decide that not to focus on the product, but on the process. Meaning the process of bringing people together, getting organizing themselves and exciting them, and hope that together we will achieve something. So that was an important decision that we made to continue with this activity, and that is one of the reasons that the pub initiative was successful. So let's say that I want to say a few things that I learned by running the pub initiative. I already mentioned to you that we had no money, and 10 years later we had this conclusion meeting in Delft, 2012. And at that meeting I was asked to give a talk, and one of the things that I mentioned there is exactly this: that pub has been successful in spite of more money, because or you could also say we were successful because we had no money. Because always when you run initiatives like this, if there's money getting involved, then the people that you bring into the initiative are people who are after the money. The fact that we had no money helped us, because people who came in did not come because of the money. They came in because they were really excited. They were really interested in the problem. So that's a lesson that we can learn from the success of the Finnish pub initiative. Money is, of course, we need money. Money, as I say, is a necessary evil, but sometimes money can corrupt. And that's one of the lessons that I learned from running the pub initiative. The other thing is about team science, is when you are running an initiative with a lot of people, team science is not just about science, it's also about people. How do you get the most out of their strengths? There are people with ambitions, people with egos, people with anxieties. So you need to overcome all of these things, and somehow, as my title says, somehow channel their self-interest towards the common interest. In these kinds of initiatives, people will not come in unless nobody will do any work unless it somehow appeals to us, to their self-interest. So somehow you have to channel their self-interest towards the common interest. That's one of the key aspects of running team science. I will skip this slide in the interest of time, but I just wanted to say that the pub initiative, as I mentioned to you, I came into this because, as I say, I had already had these ideas, And just it all just clicked. The fact that the president of the International Hydrological Sciences asked for these ideas, and I was actually ready at the time. So I had all the ideas in my mind, and so so I have a lot of appreciation for Professor Takeuchi, because when I proposed my idea, he actually gave me the opportunity to lead it, because it's easily possible that people at these kinds of levels can just emasculate ideas like these and not give people a chance. I was given a chance. The other thing that I want to mention here, most of you are young people, all of you are young people, that sometimes experience counts. I just relate an experience in 2002 when we were in Brasilia at the launch of the pub initiative. I was asked to lead this. Most of the working group that I was given were young people. We were sent into a room and asked to come back in 1 hour with a science plan. So we went in there and we were just arguing and people were shouting at each other and we were not going anywhere. And I was so disappointed that we are going to come out of that meeting with nothing. And fortunately for us, there was a senior person, Professor Enda O'Connell from the UK. He just came into this room, just sitting in the background, hearing all of us. And after about 45 minutes, he came up with just one single statement. Basically, he came up with the first question. It was so ordinary, so simple, but suddenly that was the spark. The moment he came up with this first question about pop science plan, everything went down very quickly. So sometimes experience matters in these kinds of matters. When young people are working together, don't discount experience. That was one of the things that I learned from pub initiative. So I mentioned grassroots activities, bottom up, but I think one of the things that you want to avoid is science by committee. It's easily possible that when people come together, they organize themselves into committees. Science never happened by committee. I think bureaucracy and all these things are anti-science. So I think that's something that needs to be avoided. And also in the context of team science, in running a team, I can discuss this later, but something that you have to keep in mind that different people come in with different ideas, different interests, and fairness is not the same as equality. It's not democracy. That you have to sometimes, when you're running a team, running an activity, sometimes one idea is right and the other ideas are not right. And I think that you have to make that decision. So it's something that you have to keep in mind. In terms of success, I don't want to dwell on this idea that you don't run activities and you don't design these activities to aim for success. Because if you make the success as your aim, and as Viktor Frankl says, you're going to miss it. So I think this is similar to what I said earlier. The process is more important than the product. Focus on the process, not the product. You cannot define exactly where you're going to go. You have to define how you're going to proceed. That is much more important. What you do now is much more important than where you end up with. Yeah, in the interest of time, I'll skip it. That I just reinforce the idea that team science is not democracy. That you have to allow people to express their ideas. You have to interact in a creative way. But so that's why I say good teams in whatever sphere of life require a wide range of quality that are in creative tension with each other. You're going to find people, different ideas hitting against each other, and that's all good for team science. Okay. let's talk a little bit about the problems, water problems in India, and what I can say based on my experience running these international initiatives. I worked on the pub initiative. That was only one of them initiatives, and in fact, building on the pub initiative, I have done a lot of different activities subsequently because I'm a firm believer in team science. So I ran a summer institute twice in Vancouver, brought students and professors together. We worked together for 6 weeks at a time and produced fantastic outcomes. And later in 2012, I started a new initiative. Anna mentioned about socio-hydrology, and socio-hydrology started with just a single opinion paper in 2012. Now has grown into an international movement, and I published myself something like 45 papers so far in the last 8 years, and the only money that I had got for research money that I got was $25,000 that my head of department gave. But I was able to mobilize the international community around the world. Now we have something like close to 300 papers published with a focus on socio-hydrology, all in the last 8 years. And it happened because we were able to mobilize and excite the community around the world. So it is possible. And so I've learned a lot of lessons running these initiatives. And I'm looking to what the youth network in India are trying to do. And so even though I don't exactly know what you're doing, I have some perspectives. One of the things that I always say in science is focus on problems, not methods. And it's something that I have seen in hydrology a lot, and especially in Indian hydrology. I used to say, when I was in Australia, I would get a lot of inquiries from India. Somebody will write to me saying that, Professor, I have this neural network model I have developed, but I don't have a lot of data. Can you send me some data from Australia so that I can apply this method? Now, that is precisely what you don't want to do. Solutions looking for a problem. That is not what we need. Focus on the problems. There are really interesting problems, water problems in India. Focus on the problem and forget about, don't worry about the method. Use the best method that are possible to address the problems. I think that is the right way to do things. And this is not only in India, but around the world. People tend to focus on methods. New methods will come in, and people will start running after them. And after a while, the methods become ordinary. And if you have not been trained well, then you realize that you have nowhere to go because you only trained on the method. I know that I'm thinking about research scientists who want to publish papers and so on. And there's a tendency in India and developing countries to think about problems that will impress the West. And I think that's entirely the wrong way to do it. Don't ape the West. Don't do anything just to please the West. That's a common fallacy that as I mentioned, if you focus on problems, real problems, the problems that you have in India are really exciting. And if you approach the problem in the right way and come up with solutions, the rest of the world will listen to what you do. So don't ape the West, and that's an easy trap to fall into. Now, I know that you are a large community coming from all over India, and there is always a tendency to come together and just talk and also preach. I don't think you're doing any service to anyone, including yourself, if everything that you do boils down to talking and preaching. I think you have to do something, anything, do something, and then That's the best communication that you can do. Do something. And in the interest of doing something, don't aim for big things. Just start small. Start somewhere. Start small and then learn by doing and build up and grow along the way. That's the right way to do things. And the reason I say that is that if you do something small and you're successful there, success will bring success. Other people will follow you. They will want to join with you. And good people, it's only when you're successful, good people will come to join you. Because normally good people, they don't want to waste their time. Good people will follow good people. As you know from my own experience, don't be afraid to delegate. I think that there are a lot of people with lots of talents, and if you want to do something big, one person cannot do everything. As I learned, when I was younger, as a new lecturer in Australia, I was able to delegate to my students and later my collaborators, and so that's the way to do it. And also don't do this by committee. Delegate. I think delegate, it's not a weakness to that when you have, it's not a weakness that you delegate. It's a strength that you can manage this by delegating and getting the best out of people. In cricket, if any of you follow cricket, I'm a very big fan of cricket. And my favorite commentator was Ian Chappell of Australia. He will always talk about batsmen. He will advise batsmen to play with soft hands. And so when you're doing teamwork, especially when you're starting teamwork, try to organize yourself. Don't take rigid positions at the beginning. Be a little bit flexible, because if you take very rigid positions, then you're going to get trapped into this, and very hard to get everybody to contribute. So be flexible, play with soft hands. And again, I mentioned this again, in teams, fairness is not the same as equality. That when you are in teamwork, some people are better, some people are not so good, some people are strong in one area, some people are strong in other areas, and it's very hard to manage this if you just say everybody is equal. You have to be fair, but it's not a question of equality. Fairness is not the same as equality. And whatever you do, you have to make a plan, and to get everybody come together. So the plan, any plan that you come up with, must smooth out the rough edges, brings out the common ground, and most especially, it should be something that elevates the mind. It's not the lowest common denominator that you're looking for in a successful plan, because a plan that panders to everyone appeals to no one. As I learned, in many of the initiatives that I ran, we are all free people. We know how to work with our feet. If something is not working, you won't have people join you. So you have to really make sure that anything that you do must bring in good people into this, because everybody stands to benefit from this. So I think that those are some ideas that I have in my mind, and I finished my talk with what I call John Shaki's rules of success. Now, John Shaki was an American hydrologist. So when I was running the pub initiative, I was the chair of the chair of pub, and we had an advisory board. And John Shaki was the chair of the advisory board. And he's an much older person. At that time, he was my age now. And he would just sit in the background. He will not say anything. He would just observe, and he will only comment. He will come in only when I asked him for help. And so one time he actually gave me these 3 points. These are the rules of success, especially in teamwork. So people support what they help to create. None of us has all the answers. Together, we can do anything. So I think that those are good rules of success, good rules that as a community that you can adopt in your own work. I think I will stop there, and hopefully, I have triggered some ideas in your mind, and I'll be happy to answer any questions in more detail. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Apologies for the several glitches that happened during this meeting, and thank you very much, Professor Sivapalan, for maintaining the patience, and for Veena and everyone else who helped us come back to the meeting smoothly. We would like to now invite the participants here to join the discussion. You can unmute yourself and speak, or the moderators will do so for you. You can even post your thoughts or questions in the chat box, in which case the moderators can direct them to Professor Sivapalan.
So please put your names in the chat box. I shall unmute people as they request a question. I'm unmuting Professor Jinya Mukherjee, as she has posted a few questions here.
Yes, good evening everyone, and good evening sir. I'm really very, very grateful to you for this motivating lecture, and like introducing a lot of concepts like team science and how really to go about this. So the questions that I would really like to ask you are: number one, you started at the very beginning by saying that you are not a you are a hydrologist but not a water scientist. So I would very much like you to reflect on the difference between the two, because I think increasingly there's a dire need for us to understand these differences, because we have to have a better understanding of these categorizations and their purviews, because all of us are now trying to engage and involve ourselves in pluralistic water research. So this is the first question. The second one is like you talk, your whole lecture, it's about self-interest for common interest, right? So, sir, what I would like to ask is that, would you like to pose self-interest and common interest as binaries? Like conflicting along clashing needs and aspirations, or as mutually constituted, and and it needs people, maybe the collective goodwill or collective good intention of people can through that even within self-interest or self-interest of people coming from different disciplines and people from different sectors. So their overlapping aspirations can be mapped and identified towards greater good for our one common future. So how would you pose, self-interest and common interest as absolutely as boundaries or binaries, or having a kind of overlap between the two? And my final question to you is that, sir, first of all of us are extremely grateful to you, for introducing cutting-edge concepts like socio-hydrology. But what I see these days is that, some scholars using socio-hydrology as a hyphenated terminology, while others, they are using socio-hydrology as a non-hyphenated one. Even in our this TU Delft socio-hydrology conference, I see this kind of inconsistency a lot. So for example, sir, here definitely I'm talking in lines of Eric Singedu, because when Singedu conceptualized and formulated socio-nature, he emphasized that, he emphasized socio-nature as a non-hyphenated category. And we all know that how, that erasure of the hyphen was so important to kind of stress upon the embedded and integrated relationship between nature and culture. So what would be your take on socio-hydrology? Do you think that the hyphen really matters? So these are my three questions.
Okay, thank you, Jenia. So the first question about hydrology and water, I was just being honest about my own limitation, that in spite of the fact that I'm a hydrologist, I worked on hydrology for something like 30 years, I never really thought, I was doing hydrology because why am I'm a scientist? Well, I'm a scientist, first and foremost, it's a form of self-expression. Okay, that's how I came into hydrology. Why did I become a hydrologist? Because hydrology was my specialty, and whatever I did was a form of self-expression. That's the first thing. I did not realize for a long time, until I started socio-hydrology, actually, 2010, that somehow hydrology has some relevance to water. It's my own personal limitation. So, because I was just working as a scientist, trying to publish papers, I was never thinking about that, thinking that the work that I do will have some impact on somebody somewhere. That was not my motivation. It was my own limitation. So that is what I was trying to say there, that there are lots of hydrologists, especially academics. They are hydrologists because hydrology, is whatever they do is a form of self-expression. They would just want to do, as a scientist, if you're a mathematician, that's what you do. It's a form of self-expression. Hydrology was that for me. And it was a late realization for me that hydrology is also important for solving water problems. That was a late realization. That may not be the case for everyone, but that is my own weakness, my own training, the weakness in my own training. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Of course, for solving water problems, hydrology is essential, but that is not the way I saw it when I was growing up, when I was developing my career. The second question that you asked about self-interest and the common interest, I think you almost answered that question yourself. But again, I'm looking at individuals. Or, you have something like 30 people here, 38 people joining here. At one level, why are you doing whatever you're doing? I'm a hydrologist. I'm an academic. To be successful in my career, I have to publish papers. I'm looking at it from that kind of self-interest. I have to publish, and I have to be successful that way. And so, how do I go look for many? So let's say I want to start a new initiative. How do we bring people together? What do I give them? They have to get something back, because everybody has some self-interest they want to pursue, and so I looked at that self-interest versus common interest from that very narrow perspective. That the only way that I can get people to contribute to whatever I am leading is to make sure that they get something out of this. So that's a narrow perspective, but you can broaden that perspective, and take the pub initiative, for example. So you want to solve the problem of predictions in ungauged basins, and this is a very complex problem. So at that level, you want to bring many different perspectives into this. So then the issue is that you have different perspectives, you bring together, all of them working together towards a common objective. So again, self-interest in the common interest in a broader sense. And the issue that you mentioned about bringing different disciplinary scientists and bringing together, and everybody contributes something, everybody wants to get something back, and then together we make progress. So I think you can look at this self-interest versus common interest in many different ways. I was talking mainly from the organizational perspective. How do I get people to contribute to an idea, to a project? What do they get out of this? Because if they don't get anything out of this, they will not contribute. Because, as I said, in the pub initiative or in the socio-hydrology, I as a leader, I was not able to give them any money. If you contribute, we'll give you money. I'll give you some money to hire a PhD student. I was not able to give them anything. So the only thing I could give them is, that whatever you contribute, together we'll produce something bigger, and everybody will benefit from it. So it was from that perspective that I was talking about self-interest in the common interest. But like you already said, that idea can be broadened, to another level. And the final question, I don't know that I want to discuss this idea of hyphenated thing. And as Veena Srinivasan knows, when we started socio-hydrology, we put a hyphen in there. I don't know why we did this. And for a long time, we were running with that hyphenated socio-hydrology, social-hydrology. But then lately, in the last 2-3 years, some of my colleagues, especially American colleagues, say that you should not be doing that. And even journals started pushing me. And so now it's not hyphenated anymore. And I don't know the distinction. You as you're much more knowledgeable about science and and so I don't know the difference between hyphenated socio-hydrology and non-hyphenated socio-hydrology. So I don't know that I can comment much about that. And in any case, it's maybe irrelevant for this audience. Maybe you and I can have a separate conversation about it. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thanks very much. Veena has some interesting questions as well in the chat box. If you could elaborate for the group here and give some examples of how we can really do something, certain activities, if you can suggest something. And what, in your opinion, are some of the exciting unknown frontiers for Indian water science?
Right. Okay. Good. I think, again, I spent 6 weeks in Bangalore last year, but that's the extent of my knowledge about problems. But when I said do something, this doing something could be anything, but it could be going to a particular place. Let's say there is a water problem of some kind, and you want solutions to that problem. You bring people together, and you analyze data, you collect data, you analyze data, you come up with some solutions. But they can be very simple, but you can, the alternative is you can write about it. You can say, oh, there's a problem, and you can put a newspaper article there about it. But that's not going to do much. I think my preferred approach is if there's a problem, go there and collect some data, analyze the data, and do some analysis and present some results. And that is an example of doing something. I don't know whether Veena, I can elaborate more. We can have a discussion about it, actually. That would be my way of that's what I meant by doing something, because I'm used to people coming together and talking about a problem, talking about something, and just writing essays and articles and so on. But I think in the long term, that's not very helpful. you have to do something concrete. In other words, take a problem and do something about it. That's how you develop confidence in yourself. That's how you develop support for whatever you are doing. Because a lot of people are very leery of people saying things. You can say, oh, you can have an opinion about everything. Having an opinion is never helpful because it's not going anywhere. If you have an opinion, you better go and do something with it. So that's what I meant by doing something. I welcome any other suggestions because I don't have all the experience about it. The second question that Veena asked was about, I can't remember now. Neha, can you remind me?
Sure. Her question was, what in your opinion are some of the exciting unknown frontiers in Indian water science? Are any of these amenable to team science by a group of young researchers like IYWN?
Absolutely. I think that when I was in Bangalore, I had the opportunity to meet several young scientist students and so on. And, there was a time when, India had problems with money and funding and data and so on. But now, my feeling is there's a lot of data available now, or becoming available. So, and my feeling is that I'm now speaking about hydrology now. There's a lot you can do just taking the data that is already available, analyzing it, and learning from the data and bringing it out. So one of the things that I got started when I was in India is what I call comparative hydrology, taking the data, analyzing it, processing it, and begin to compare. Because for me, Indian hydrology is quite exciting. India can be the perfect laboratory for hydrology, especially what I call regional process hydrology. Because this is what I see, in India, you have the mountains on the west, in the north, and then you have the monsoons, and you have everything in between, and how they interact with each other and produce, regional patterns. There's and how the landscapes are organized, the vegetation is organized, how the people are organized, and all of that, is ripe for systematic analysis. So I think that the first thing I would suggest to do, and I think it is possible now because I actually started something when I was there with some students and postdocs. I'm already involved in some activities. I think that you can analyze data and extract patterns and build models and so on. So I think that is what I would suggest that somebody do, and it's perfectly amenable for team science with people working together. And one of the things that I see appearing in the literature here from India is, the standard work about climate change. Somebody take some climate model outputs and then put it through a hydrological model and making some predictions about what will happen in 2100. Yeah, I find that kind of a research very boring. And this is an example of what I called earlier about aping the West. I don't know that you want to do that kind of work. I think that you want to do something that brings out what is unique about India to the rest of the world. I think that would be very exciting. Just as an example, there's a lot of things that can be done, but this is something that I saw can be done, and I actually have started some collaborations with young Indian scientists on that. Okay.
Thanks so much. Those were really wise and insightful words. Next, I can see a question from Vimal Mishra. Would you like to unmute yourself and direct the question or have a discussion?
Yeah.
Okay. In that case, I will read it out. What are your views on developing Indian-centric
Hello.
hydrology? Yeah.
Okay, he's coming on. Yeah.
Yeah, Professor Sivapalan, it was a pleasure to listen you, and it was wonderful talk. So thank you so much for enlightening all of us. So the question I have in my mind is basically there is a lot of debate nowadays that we should have a India-centric hydrological model, and the argument behind that is that the existing models that we basically borrow from other places developed, they most often don't represent the processes or the complex heterogeneity or the human interventions or the scale of human interventions exist in Indian river basins or watersheds, right? So given the response you gave in the previous question, what is unique about India if you compare other places is that our watersheds are completely different than other places. They are mostly affected by human intervention. So I just would like to know, what is your opinion that should we go for building a complete new hydrological model, or we should adopt models that are already existing? There are a number of models and tweak them to solve the problems we are facing related to hydrology.
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. I think I think the answer is clear, very obvious. And I think I'll just give you some experience from the pub initiative. When we were running the pub initiative, that question came up: should we aim for a universal model? And we quickly abandoned that idea. That I think that remains the case to this day. I don't think that there's a unique one model that fits the world, working towards that kind of a model is never the right thing to do, because it's almost like, as I mentioned, going after a product, not the process. Okay, so because modeling itself is a learning exercise. You learn by building models. So I think that models, I wouldn't agree that there is one model for the whole of India. I think that you should allow for plurality. You should allow for different types of models from different parts of India, and people will, from the grassroots, from the bottom up, build models that are appropriate for different places, and learn from that. I think that this modeling, it's something that you have to develop yourself. I never like the idea of taking some model from some other country and bringing it into India, because hydrology is not a universal field. Hydrology is very local, and even the best models that you see around, they don't necessarily capture some of the unique features that are in India. So I think that modeling should become a activity that should be pursued in India from the grassroots, from the bottom up, and you learn from it. So multiple models for different parts of India, that's perfectly okay. I mean, of course, you can borrow some principles, algorithms, and so on from other parts, but it should be a homegrown exercise. Model building it should be a homegrown exercise. So that is consistent with my answer to the earlier question, that you already have a lot of data now coming online, and you can use the data to guide you in terms of what kind of models will be appropriate for India and for particular parts of India. So that will be my perspective. I tell you a story. When I was in Australia, I developed my own model. It was called LASCAM. So that model building was the way that I actually learned hydrology. I learned hydrology by building my own model. And when I finished the model and I gave it to the Water Corporation of Western Australia, and when I moved back to the US, I left the model there. I never touched that model afterwards. Okay, that was my attitude to modeling. It's the way that you learn. So I think that would be my answer to your question. In that context, I'll tell you one more thing. I actually started some conversation when I was in Bangalore with a couple of postdocs, and we were talking about doing some analysis on the Ganges River basin. And as they began to explain to me some of the things, some of the unique features of the Ganges basin, I got a shock, because I did not know these kinds of heterogeneities. You know, you have the northern part of the basin heavily influenced by snowmelt from the Himalayas, and the lower part heavily influenced by monsoons. So you have one large basin. Different parts of the basin are impacted by different climatic features. Now, that, I don't know whether people in India know this, but people outside India do not know this. I thought that story itself needed to be told, and I'm hoping that work will continue and we will see the output of that. But that's an example of very interesting features that you already have in India that need to be brought out for your own benefit, but for the rest of the world to also know. I hope that I answered your question there. Thank you.
Prakriti has another question. I'll ask her to unmute, and she can elaborate on the question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Sivapalan. This was very, very, insightful. I just had a question pertaining to, you mentioned in your slides that scholars, especially young in this space, should play with soft hands and avoid taking rigid positions. How would you sort of guide us to skillfully navigate this, very deeply divided discourse on water policy and governance, especially in India? I say this because, we senior researchers, especially in think tanks, I'm not specifically talking about academicians here, but who end up mentoring us as young scholars, often find themselves within very strict boundaries of these binaries, from techno-legal versus socio-political. That's like the larger formulations, they engage with on water problems, but really dam and anti-dam, and very local knowledge-based, very essentialist in their approach. And so that for very young scholars who are very sort of, who are excited and, are absorbing, initially in their career, that ends up defining, unless a very significant event sort of, or engagement takes them away, because networks also are arranged accordingly. And so, I would really be grateful if you could shed some light on how young scholars especially could navigate this space and delicately handle those opposing views in light of more curiosity-driven research, more problem-driven research. So,
right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think that some of the challenges that you face, talking to senior scientists in India, but this is, this is something that I see everywhere. In Sri Lanka, where I come from. What you're seeing in senior scientists is a result of their own narrow training. I think that that's the way we were all trained in the olden days. We were put in silos. You are an engineer, you are a hydrologist, you are a social scientist, and so on. And everybody had their own superiority. Engineer tends to think that because they are quantitative, they are superior, and somebody who is a social scientist who are not quantitative is inferior, and vice versa. All these kinds of things. That's a result of their poor training. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. And I'm hoping that the younger scientists these days are not so narrowly trained and narrowly focused. And one of the things, I mentioned about play with soft hands. One of the things that you have to think about or follow when people come together from different disciplines, different perspectives, the number one thing that you need to have is respect. Respect is the most important thing. That you don't want to you want to throw out these the superiority and inferiority, and everybody has something to contribute. And that's the number one thing, respect. And the second thing is that the reason I say play with soft hands is because is the superiority tells you to take certain rigid positions about decisions that you make. Sometimes when you make these kind of rigid decisions, it actually can end up in disaster. So the first order of business when you bring people together is listen to people, try to understand the other people's perspectives, and somehow bring the different perspectives together and take decisions slowly for a while. And of course eventually you have to make decisions, but just like a batsman come into the crease, and for a few minutes, you have a fast bowler coming in, but you have to for a while watch the ball. Again, I'm sorry to invoke cricket, but that's the way a good cricket batsman deals with fiery fast bowling. They just watch the ball, play with soft hands, until they get their confidence to face the ball. So it's a similar perspective. When just there's nothing wrong with listening, respecting, until you get a big picture, and then you can begin to become stronger and be confident, and then that enables you to proceed much more strongly. So that is all I can say. I mean, it is something that I came across several times in my career, that when people bring together, if I decide upfront this is the way we're going to do it, and then you just put off a lot of people. So you have to go through a period of listening and respecting, and get a sense of what the community is feeling, and what the community is able to contribute. Because if everybody, if only a few people contribute, then whatever you are start doing is not going to be successful. So you have to bring everybody together, and that means that there's a period of listening and respecting before you can actually begin to take action. You have to take people on board. That's very important, and that is what I meant by play with soft hands. I hope that made it clear.
Yeah, thanks very much. So we would like to invite Veena now for a follow-up question, followed by Genia, and then we will end the meeting.
Okay.
So over to you, Veena.
Sorry to dominate. I was waiting to see if there were students who were going to type, but since they didn't, I thought I would ask a follow-up question. So one of the things, the comment that so one of the jokes that we've often had in India, as researchers in general, is, something only becomes interesting when the white guy says it,
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that the aping happens is because we don't have our own journals and so on, but what stories matter and how you write the narrative and how you fit it into the larger theory is very much dictated by what questions and valid and interesting science. Now, one question that you had, or one comment you had made last year, which I thought would be worth asking you about here, is that, a lot of people do interesting things, but they kind of aren't able to tell the story in the way that they are able to flip their mind space and tell the story in a way that the journals, which is primarily Western editors and so on, would like to hear. And so a lot of Indians sometimes do interesting work or otherwise also interesting work, but they haven't learned that art of storytelling. Any advice on how to learn to find that? Because sometimes it's staring like this thing, right? They told you something that was interesting, that you said that was interesting, but they've seen it so many times that it didn't occur to them that this was something that the world wants to know. I don't know if you're understanding. So how do you help Indian young researchers kind of find that framing angle?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good question, because
reach wide audiences.
Yeah, you were kind of breaking up, so I didn't listen entirely, but I got the gist of your question. So this is this is a big challenge for young Indian scientists, because they have the talent, they have they have some interesting problems, but uh, when it comes to the writing part, they struggle, and they write the paper in a way that the journal looks at it and says, "Oh, this is all irrelevant. This is not very interesting," and they reject it. This happens a lot, and I'm actually still working on this. I'm working with a couple of PhD students at IASC in Bangalore, and they also went through the same problem because um, they had, based on my lectures in Bangalore, they had done some really great work, but they couldn't initially. But now I think it's settled now. But they couldn't frame it in a way that that would make it interesting to a journal like Water Resources Research. Okay, so there's an important issue of storytelling, and then the question is, what kind of story do you tell to get a paper published in a Western journal? What kind of story? Because again, it comes back to there's a bit of aping here there, because you want to present the story in a way that will connect to a particular discourse that's happening in the rest of the world. So that requires for the Indian scientists to know, to have a feel for what's going on around the world. You know, if you don't know what the rest of the world is working on, you know, what are the trends? Let's put it that way. What are the trends in research in that particular area? If they're not aligned with that trend, it's very hard to put their story into that trend in a way that the journal will see relevance for the work. So I think that so my answer to that question is actually, number one, emphasize the art of storytelling. That's, people are not well trained about that. That not only in India but everywhere. Just the art of storytelling is very, very important. But the second thing is what story to tell, and what story to tell depends on having a broad idea. Having a broad idea about the trends that are happening around the world. Where's the field going, and how does my work align with what's going on? So you can connect it and tell a story in such a way that you bring out the unique aspects of Indian hydrology into this. I mean, that's the best thing that I can say about that, Veena.
Thanks, Siva. I think that's exactly on point. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's
so
what I
you
wanted
need to be
to
aware. I mean, I think that you cannot be like a frog in the well. You know, you sit there and not. I mean, you have to know. You have to be aware of what's going on, and that requires a lot of reading and so on. So, I mean, I have to tell you. I mean, the young audience here. You know, of course, it's much easier for me sitting in my office here to read up. So I follow the literature a lot. I just every day, you know, a few hours actually, I browse the journals, who is publishing, what are they publishing, where is the field going. And when I go to a conference these days, I spend more time, you know, seeing the big picture. Where is the field going? You know, how is the work that I'm doing connecting to what everybody else is doing? So I get a sense of what's going on, and I think that that keeps me, you know, abreast of what's going on. So I think that that's something that you have to do also in India. You know don't rely on what your advisor is telling you. You have to have your own perspective. You have to have, you know, develop your own perspective of what's going on, because that's the only way you can tell a good story. Thank you.
Genia has another question, which is a follow-up to Vimal Mishra's question previously.
Okay. Yeah.
Please
Yeah.
unmute yourself, Genia.
Okay.
Yes, thanks, Anav. And I'm really enjoying this discussion a lot. And this is, of course, a follow-up of Vimal sir's question. And also, this particular direction, in which this discussion is actually leading us. Thanks, Veena, as well. So, sir, what I think is that this aping, I think, has been thrust upon us. And as a student of history, I think that the colonial hydrology and its legacy during our contemporary times also is kind of playing a huge role. A huge role in this in the Indian water scenario. So what I'm trying to ask is that like, for example, I saw Vimal sir's question about India-centric hydrological models, and you also talked about India-centric hydrological processes. But I'm just thinking loud that what about like India-centric hydraulic techniques? Because, like, for example, this colonial period of 300 years, and then quote unquote modern hydrology for 200 years, and this series of subsequent like interventions in the form of initially there of embankment, followed by the period of perennial irrigation system, and followed by this multi-purpose river valley development projects. And unfortunately, the same legacy being continued with now the international linking of rivers, which can also be contextualized within this larger scheme of big interventions on river, disrupting the e-flow regime of rivers and water bodies. So the question, sir, is finally is that on one hand we see that there is dying wisdom. So there is dying wisdom in terms of the array of techniques and small scale, kind of environmentally benign and socially accommodative water technologies or water systems that India had during this pre-colonial period, ancient and also medieval period, because medieval period often we miss. But there's a fascinating history of how like Sakya, Saduf, Wanat, etc. were transplanted by these Mughals and Sultanate rulers from Central Asia, like Samarkand, Baghdad, etc., Damascus. But on the other hand, today there's also a problem. Like, Indian politics, how can we get rid out of it? And maybe we don't also need to get rid out of it, but everything is being romanticized and kind of like, sir, what is going on right now. So what could be a proper way or a systematic way through which this balance, through which we can actually strike a balance? And how can historical socio-hydrology also extract stories from archives or from oral history sources that is there within the Indian subcontinent? So like in what I understand now that, in historical socio-hydrology, it provides us a lot of chance to kind of complement data with stories. But can we also think about the other way around, where these stories can also get complemented with data? And how can historical record sources in the forms of artifacts, oral history, in different forms, both archaeological and literary traditions, etc., can it also play an important role and contribute within the emerging field of socio-hydrology?
Yeah. Thank you, Virginia, for that very good question. So I tell you, this is very personal. I mean, I went from Sri Lanka to Princeton for my PhD, and you mentioned about the colonial colonial experience. I thought that India was better than Sri Lanka, but I felt, as a colored person starting my PhD, I never felt equal. Number one, it was somehow burned into my body, into my mind, that I'm inferior by definition. In other words, anything that the West does is superior. That was something that I had to overcome over a period of time, because it was a shock to me that Princeton admitted me, and even then I never felt equal. For a long time, I never felt equal. So I think that most of you are born after independence, but unfortunately the colonial legacy persists in the hearts of people, and so it's something that you have to overcome. And many times I always felt, something my high school English teacher told me, that before you can be equal to someone, you have to be their superior. This is a object lesson that I took from my high school teacher. That's the way I look at the world nowadays, now living in the US, that before you can be equal to someone, you have to be their superior. So I completely agree with what you said, that there is an inherent inferiority, a feeling of inferiority in all the colonized countries that we have to overcome. And you don't overcome it by, as I said, by just aping. So if you just follow what the West is telling you, then you're never going to overcome this. So you have to somehow develop inherent confidence. You have to develop your own ways. Hey, I'm going to do this myself. Self-reliance. So this is why I said earlier, I think this youth network can be a very good mechanism to overcome this, is that you have to develop your own confidence about yourself, and don't try to please the West. Don't try to be equal to the West. You have to try to be their superior. So you do the best work yourself, building on what you have, and I'm sure over time, little by little, you overcome. That will be my answer to that question. And I completely agree with you about the hydrotechnological thing. A lot of the things that you're doing and doing wrongly in India and Sri Lanka is because of the colonial legacy. Building big dams as the only solution, big project, all of these things. So all of these are a result of a colonial legacy. And I know in southern India, you have these network of small tanks that were there before the British came along. And the British came and they said, what nonsense this is. This is not very efficient. Let's build big dams. And you now know the result of this. You could have continued with the old system of connected networks of small dams. That could have been pursued, but unfortunately, you went the other way, again, because of the colonial heritage. So I think that there's no easy answer to this. How do you overcome this inherent feeling of inferiority? And you don't overcome it by simply aping the West. So somehow you have to do things from the grassroots. This is what the youth network is hoping to do. I think you start from the bottom. Don't worry about what other people think about it. Just build up and grow. And I can tell you that in 10 years, you can begin to do fantastic things, and the world will look up. So that is the only way. Don't expect any help from the top. It has to come from the bottom. Working together, building networks, organizing yourself. These are the ways that we can do this. And based on my own experience, Jenia, of starting the socio-hydrology movement, as I said in my talk, I have done this. I mean, not me, several people, but we did not do this with lots of millions of dollars. It's just organization, just simple community activities. So we were able to achieve this. So I think that's the only way to overcome these problems, feeling of inferiority. Again, I remind you, before you can be equal, you have to be their superior. That is when they begin to respect you. So people respect me now. They did not respect me when I started. They respected me because through my own initiative, I decided that I'm going to do my own thing and I'm going to become superior. That's the only way. It's only when you become superior that they begin to make you feel equal. Thank you. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, sir, for the truly inspiring talk. We apologize again to everyone, and we thank you for having the patience of bearing with us. And thank you, Professor Sivapalan and Professor Veena, for helping us re-coordinate the meet. And that brings us to this end, to the end of this talk. And we thank you all again. Because I learned a lot of new things, and I'm sure everyone did too. So thank you, everyone, and bye.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to give this lecture, and I'll be happy to talk to anyone offline later, and we can pursue this conversation. I definitely like to see how you progress as a community. I really hope that the youth network becomes very successful and set an example, because I think that one of the most important problems that you have in India as water scientists is I don't see any large organization that brings people together. It's completely missing, and for a country like India, that's a huge gap. So I think that I hope that you guys grow and become influential and attract more and more people into your group, and then begin to have an impact. I think I'm sure it will happen, but I think you've started somewhere, and I really encourage you to continue with this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
So bye, everyone.
Bye.